All right, so I'm joined by Sheets today. I'm glad that I was able to finally have him on after quite a few weeks off from having you on. And what I want to talk for like 10, 15 minutes on on Sims and the impact that the projection based uh, I was going to say ownership, that the influence that projections and Sims are having on recent ownership inflations, not just with NASCAR, but we saw it at the end of the season for the NFL. Um, and this isn't really a discussion on if sims are good or bad, but I mainly want to talk about this from like a game theory perspective, because uh, when you're looking at like high level dfs, like high level entry 101 is like, one, figure out where your opponents are playing, and two, like get different from that. And what we've seen recently this year in NASCAR, we're seeing that like the top two or three like safe slash cash slash like place differential plays have been incredibly high owned, and then the top two lap leaders projected wise have just been like over owned, like to the moon and back. And I kind of just wanted to hear your opinion on that, because I think we're seeing like, I don't think we're seeing like enough course correction from people entering these contests like we should. I just kind of wanted to hear your opinion on all that stuff.
Well, you're going to have to cut me off because I mean, I could go on for quite a while with this type of discussion. But I want to start by challenging the assumption, and I'm not saying that it's wrong or right, but whenever we do stuff like this, you figure out whether your assumption is just something that we think we are observing or if we were actually observing. So the first thing I would suggest, if someone really wanted to deep dive into this, is to actually see if what you're saying is right. In other words, like your observation is that I don't want to say the best plays. Let's put it another way, but like the highest owned golfers, the highest owned drivers are even higher uh, than they have been. And the first thing I would say is I wonder if anybody's actually. I know probably Stukas, whatever. He's probably done work on it. I know people probably have. Like how much of a difference is there now than it used to be, and what time frame we're talking about when we say what used to be, right? Was
Mhm.
it 6 months, 8 months, five years ago? It feels right that way, right? That
Mhm.
that the if you have a good high place differential play, which is going to look really good, and you think he's going to be 40%, it's just going to end up 70, right? It feels that way, but maybe it's always been that way. I, Probably not, but again, if you're really going to make first of all changes to the way you play based on this type of analysis, you're probably going to do yourself a good service by actually doing that homework. However you can do that. Um, the other thing I would say is, again, it's important to know what we're talking about here when you're talking about sims, right? There's two separate things going on. There's the sims that are allegedly or presumptively doing a simulation of the race itself that to help make your projections better, and that's basically what SaberSim is purporting to do. They're purporting to actually run sims, right? Let's get these terms right, of the race, so that their range of outcomes in their projections more accurately reflects like different results. That's one thing. The second thing, which is I think what people really are talking about, is the advent of the contest sims, which means that they're simulating not how the race itself is going to go, but how the people are going to be betting on it. Like what the lineups are going to look like, given what projections there are out there in the industry, and that's what really is what people are mean when they're saying the sims in general is people are creating these fields of lineups and comparing certain lineups to that to really try to quantify what leverage means. Like if you have a range of outcomes with a projection that goes from here to here, and you know that 40% of the people are going to be doing this type of thing, you can quantitatively decide that this group of lineups or this lineup or this whole portfolio of lineups is going to do better than this other group of lineups, specifically against whatever field of lineups you're trying to set up and compare it to. So these are the different intellectual advancements that we're talking about, that we're fighting here. if we're going to try to figure out why, if it's true that the best plays, if that's a better way to put it, are being just over owned or even owned higher, I think that you could also come to the fact that I think that overall content and just raw projections are probably better. You know, there are more people doing it. Like the Run Pure guys are obviously really sharp at it now. And that guy that you mentioned, oh my God, this guy's now doing projections. It's over. I even forget what his name was, whatever. But some other guy that you had mentioned. So there are more people doing it, and there's more technology out there, and there's more data. So whenever there's more technology and more data, and more people doing something, then the quality of it is just going to be better. So the raw median projections themselves are going to be better. So that's one reason why, before we even get into the Sims, that the best plays, whatever, are going to be higher owned than what people might think, is because just the projections themselves are better than probably people think. But what becomes interesting, as you're kind of alluding to, is what happens when a certain percentage of the lineup builders are trying to actually use the contest sims and fade like all this information. You know what I mean? They're going to presume, okay, these are the projections, everything's cool. So how can I even like not try to out project people, but sort of kind of like outmaneuver them? You know, like I know that based on projections, these are what people are going to play, but how do I make money anyway? Like, how do I just get enough leverage off of that? And it seems actually incorrect that the more people that use Sims, the more likely it is that the better projected plays or whatever are going to be higher owned. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because if concept Sims are going to say, okay, if this is a good play and everybody's playing them, we should probably try to fade that a little bit. So it actually doesn't make sense to say that the advent of contest Sims is going to make the highest owned players highly owned. And I use that and again, I want to talk different sports here, but I use baseball as an example. And part of my work with these different sim products is to figure out what sports using the actual contest sims has that much incremental impact on what your lineups look like, right? So, like, for example, I always talked about this, like when you do basketball, if you do like a lineup that's just based on the regular Saber sim build or regular even optimal build, and then you compare that to a same portfolio of lineups when you apply the contest sims to what think people are playing, there isn't that big of a difference. Okay. Whereupon, on the other hand, in baseball, like it's a freaking war. Like if you put your best lineups in baseball, it's going to look like this. And if you apply contest sims in baseball, depending on what settings you use, you might just like you might just have like 70% of whatever stack is against the highest owned pitcher. Okay, whatever it is. And that's because, again, that's what contest sim is supposed to do, is to figure out where that leverage is. And because baseball is a freaking wildly random sport, that's a good time to do it. So with NASCAR, I would just say that the more people that do contest sims, the more the benefit of the leverage kind of like decreases, because people continue to leverage sort of against themselves, and that kind of like crunches a little bit. But to answer your overall question is why, or does it seem as though the contest sims are causing this kind of like wild like ownership of like the best plays or whatever it is? I don't think I don't think that that's where the correlation is. I don't think that the advent of the contest sims necessarily is creating that. I really think that it's just more the quality of the projections themselves. That's my instinct, at least.
Okay. I mean, I'd love conversations like this, like, and I'm trying to do my best to both take in what I'm hearing and also ask questions. That's why I was writing stuff down that people might have, that I don't think have been talked about or answered nearly enough as they should be when it comes to this type of conversation. But I do appreciate your insight and at least opinion on kind of how everything is moving in, and maybe at least for me, with where DFS is at now, whenever I refer to sims, I just refer to contest sims now, because I just assume, or I look at it of like the projections are very much very accurate, of how everything is going. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because I have seen this or been asked this before by other people, and also going back to kind of the first thing that you mentioned, doing the homework of going back and looking at how ownership and everything has, if it's changed, if it has changed. I personally don't have that work in front of me right now. I wish I did for this conversation, and that might be something I can do this week to possibly come back and talk about it the following date. But I've had several people that I respect and who are way smarter than me have shown that or told me that. And so that's kind of why, like, I trust them, of them doing the homework. That's kind of where I'm at, with
Yeah,
my opinion of where it
that
went
makes
to.
sense. I mean, that certainly.
So that's why I haven't personally done it, or why I don't have it in front of me to bring it up. I wanted to bring up, do you think now the population of DFS players that are using contest sims is probably still pretty low, just due to the price, uh, like the price lockout that some people can't afford it. But even on like cheaper products, do you think people are using contest sims incorrectly? And before you answer, I want to bring up how I use them, because I don't. I do a lot of things to the contest sims and the results that I get from that, that are drastically different to what I get if I just run it without any changes. I think that's how you should be using a product like that. If you aren't put, I know you use your geomean calculator, but I think if you're using a contest sim with like no adjustments or changes, I think you're using them incorrectly. But I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Okay, so again, all a contest sim is again is creating a well, not creating a field of lineups, is presuming a field of lineups. Okay, you have to tell the simulator what field of lineups that you want. Okay, and that is an important point, and we're going to get to that. And you have to tell the simulator what the payout structure is. Okay, and then you have to tell the simulator what type of variance there is between the different inputs, meaning players. Okay, and once you do that, it really is kind of a trivial calculation, okay, for someone that can program. All right. So what that means is that the information that you should be changing, the only information that has any variance, in my opinion, are well, the projections, right? The field of the lineup field that you're comparing it to, and the variance and distribution curves of the different players. Okay, so when you're talking about what types of changes, right? Remember, changes just means okay, Saber Sim or any sim product, for lack of any other, because they have to give you some sort of default setting. You know what I mean? Like if you don't make any changes, what are you gonna what field of lineups are we gonna compare it to? And depending on the sport, Saber Sim has either kind of like stock, you know, fields of lineups, meaning like in basketball, like in baseball, they have like the like flagship NME and high stakes 20 max or whatever it is, and they've done some back testing. I say allegedly because listen, they say they did back testing, right? They did back testing that those types of lineups or those types of fields are good for this types of contests. Okay, fair enough, right? For other contests, they won't even do that because it's just hard. They'll just say, you know what, we're just going to use Saber Sim ownership as the description of what's going to govern what type of lineups you're going to be up against. Okay, and it's that's really the main thing that you have to kind of figure out is what field of lineups you're going to be comparing it to. Now, once you do that, again, the different changes again that I might make are usually like post build. You know, like when after you do that initial build, then you could do stuff like, well, do I want to do min uniques 2 or min uniques 3 or things like that? Do I want to do a geomean filter? Okay, to kind of to kind of really make sure that I'm going for a no dupe type of thing. You know, and those are all like post sim work. You know, so when you talk about changes and stuff, that's what I consider kind of like changes. Is beforehand, you have to figure out what field of lineups you're going to compare it to. That's one thing you can change. Within Saber Sim, you can't really change like the distribution curves, of the players. They kind of preload those. There are some sim products that if you're so inclined, you could do that and actually set a standard deviation for a particular player as opposed to something else. but I mean it's hard. Let's
Mhm.
put it that way. So, and I want to go back again to the overall discussion where you said, well, some people might not be using these things correctly. I'm telling you that 5 years from now, we're going to look back, and I know that we're all using them incorrectly right now, 100%. I just don't know exactly how. So we're just figuring it out.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, but those are all my views on, I guess, the question you just asked.
Okay, and so the reason why, I mean, we've been live for 15 minutes because I feel like this whole discussion that we just had, or whether people are aware of this or not, like that, everything we just mentioned there needs to be aware of before we enter the discussion for like a slate like this or how NASCAR is and stuff. The last thing I wanted to bring up that I have seen personally is that the ownership, not SaberSim's ownership, not their projected ownership, but if you, it's specifically for Cup, but I've noticed it personally for the two lower series. If you take SaberSim's raw projections, you build, your lineups, whatever, and then you run the contest sims for that, the lineups that SaberSim is giving you at that point and the ownership that that pool of lineups has been very close to what the real ownership in these contests have been.
Okay,
So
so
like,
let me share my screen for a second.
yeah, go right ahead, go right ahead.
So to that point, okay, one of the actual inputs when I do my own projections, my own ownership projections, is after I make my ownership projections and my actual projections, I will run exactly what you said. I'm going to run like 5,000 lineups, okay, or as many lineups as it takes to approximate how many are going to be in the field.
Mhm.
Okay, for example, it's not exactly right because there are going to be dupes in there as well, but I'll run a whole just take an analytical term, shithole, shit ton of lineups, right? And then what I'll do is I will see what the ownership distribution is of that set, and I will create a whole new column within my ownership projections.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to make that trump everything else, but it's going to be another input. Okay, um, and when we're talking about SaberSim, for example, like I just ran say 5,000 lineups. The place you're looking for that is not the exposure column. The place you're looking for that is this pool column here, because what that does is that, remember, I built say 5,000 lineups and I rated my top 50. And I didn't even do the whatchamacallit, the contest sim yet. Okay, I just did just 5,000 lineups. You're using whatever, and this pool is what represents. So what I've, again, back to our assumptions, right? We're assuming that the projections that I'm using are the ones that are going to be on average used by the industry to create lineups.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me jump in really fast. Just
Yeah.
when I was referring to the ownership that I get from running the contest sims, I'm specifically talking about exposure and not the pool ownership. I just want to
Well, the
clarify that.
problem though is if you do that, it depends on how many lineups you run. In other words, like if I'm running 50 lineups, excuse me, if I'm creating 5,000 lineups and only using the top 50, like this is what exposure means. It's like how much of my top 50 have each of these drivers, right? And it's a pretty small sample size if you're going to like create an ownership projection, is to only say use 50 lineups. So where do you go? I mean, do you go 150? Do you go 250? You know what I mean? If you're going to approximate what an ownership projection is going to be for a whole field of lineups, um, you probably should do as many as you can. That would be
Mhm.
my opinion.
So, and then I swear, everybody, we will talk about the slate for today. I just want to like, I mean, we're talking about this. I think we need to, and I'm explaining how I've used the Sims because, like, for me personally, I still hand build every single NASCAR line that I make. That's just how I am. NASCAR is the one sport I don't use anything related to contest sims. I do run them, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because typically I'll run my pool, and then I'll have like 300 or something lines outside of the pool that would be the exposures. And I've noticed, just reiterating, that I've noticed that the exposures that SaberSim gives me on the default contest sim settings have lined up very well with what the actual ownership in the slate has been. So, like, for example, like the pivot off of the main lap leader, right? Like projected ownership across like different sites and stuff would be like 22, 24%. So we see him as a leverage play off the main lap leader. And then when I run my stuff, my exposure would have him at like, or I would personally have exposure based on those lineups at like 35, 36%. And then when the slate locks, he's actually like near that 35, 36%. So like I know we're like, levels down at this point in this discussion, but that's what I've been noticing and seeing.
No, no. So I want to address something, and I'm not dismissing him here. I want to address Michael's point here, and I think this is an important point as far as content goes. Michael's saying this lineup build is pretty boring, ready to talk racing, dude. I mean, in a way, I agree. You know what I mean? The thing is that when it comes to delivering content, it's very, very difficult for me, like to figure out what to do, and that's why I try, like for certain sports, like I do this for MMA. Maybe we should do this for NASCAR. Maybe we should do two completely separate videos, right? Where to talk about racing, to talk about drivers, which is really important, and it's definitely more fun. Okay, and that is very important. And yet, it is also important for people who are interested to talk about this stuff too. So that's why this is all hard as far as doing content goes. So I do want to set time aside for just lineup build stuff, so people will know. By the way, if you're going to come here, we're not going to be hashtag talking racing, dude. We're going to be talking about lineup build, and then others where we talk about driver by driver stuff, where whatever. And I do think that's important also. So I wasn't like yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, well, I don't know about that, Michael, but anyway, here's one thing I did want to show. Like, for example, like it took a while for SaberSim to put their sim toggle on today. You were only able to build based on projection, and just to that point, like I put these lineups in. I built 50 lineups just on using projections, and when I did that, and it just used a median projection with nothing else, I was getting 100% Chase Elliott, 75% Brad Keselowski, 76% Chris Buescher. I'm not even comment on whether these are good or not. Okay, but this is just kind of my point. Right now, when we turned on the sim thing, right? Well, let's just do one. Let's use, and this is again a decision you have to make. Do you want to use SaberSim ownership, or do you want to use like what your build was, as someone else just kind of brought up? Let's, for the purposes of this, let's, instead of using SaberSim ownership, because then you're just relying on one data point, let's presume that my build of 5,000 lineups was going to at least reflect what the field was going to do, and I'm doing this to make a point that the difference between just using a median projection. Okay, now again, we weren't even using the SaberSim, whatever, just using a median projection and then running a contest sim with all the different distributions and stuff like that. Like you still see like 70% Chase Elliott, but significantly less. Okay. So that is kind of an important point.
Yeah, no. I fully get you. I was just kind of keeping up on chat as you were saying that. I wanted, as you look at like your results, or we have the results on the screen from like this example. Everybody that I know, like this is how they approach like every DFS slate. Not necessarily talking about sims, but like it's not even about drivers and projections. Like I think this is like how you should be approaching DFS. Like for every slate you play, I feel like you're leaving money on the table if you aren't, or not optimizing your own process like that. But I mean, we're here, so we'll go ahead, and this entire discussion we've had, we could apply it to the race that we're seeing so far. And so because SaberSim, I guess it's because they're working on their new API, since they've had delays in their projections and numbers going up as of recently. From what I'm seeing from stuff is that like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski, and people like that are like being recommended in nearly all lineups and stuff. And regardless of what I personally think of what to do with William Byron, I think there is like true high cases to be made for people like I believe right now Kyle Busch is probably the highest projected own lap leader from SaberSim, but like Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick, um, Bubba Wallace, people like that are people that I'm seeing as very much in play and very viable, that projections are not showing that or not reflecting those, like that upside. And I think they're overvaluing place differential, like we're seeing, whether it's like SaberSim or another like mean based projection source. I just think we're going to see a bit of like over owned or over ownership
Well,
that is over owned, like to Larson, for example.
well, let's talk about. Let me ask you this question about. I don't want to say the race, but let me ask you about. Yes, let me ask you about the race in this way. And listen, I will shout out. I'll shout out our boy Pierce for this to kind of create this way of thinking about things. Right, you're getting points from different buckets, right? You get points from finishing the race in a good spot. You get points from point differential, or you get points from laps led and fast laps, right? And people and drivers are competing for those points. Okay, like if someone gets first, then no one else can get first. If somebody leads a lap, no one else can lead a lap, etc. Okay, um, so when we talk about comparative ownership and things like that, who's over owned or whatever, it's good to think about like how many points are trying to be fought for, like in the different buckets, right? So I haven't done that much work with the content this week, but enough to know that there's a bunch of hashtag great plays in the place differential category, right? Like there's a lot of points that people are saying are available for for different drivers, right? And like 8, 9 great place differential plays, but they can't all get there. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Um, so, and as opposed to that, maybe not as many. Like maybe there are like good plays are going to be dedicated to Dominator points or whatever it is. So in the context of like this slate, I know you probably went through all the drivers, but who's your favorites? So what bucket or what do you do with all these place differential plays that all look good, right? Do you just play the lowest own of them? You know what I mean? How are you dealing with this?
So let me go ahead and put my screen up on
Yeah, yeah,
now, and then I can use that to answer
yep,
that. So everybody
whatever.
knows that I very much heavily rely on recent form and how teams and drivers are doing in those situations. And so when we look at this weekend's race and we look at the conditions that practice and qualifying were in, which is absolutely nothing like what we're going to find today. Now, as I've stated many times, like practice data and stuff like that, I think that's overvalued in general. We have 3-hour races every week that show where people are in true speed and not, and they shouldn't be held to what they are doing in like 15, 20, 25 laps in practice the day before or whatever. And so for me, I'm personally not using any of the practice data at all. I am very much relying on where people have been over the 1.5s entering this race. Texas is not on the screen because in terms of what I would have to do to sort that data or all the data points that I use in Texas, I would be very much like hands-on, manually putting stuff because we had so many yellows, people wrecking out, yada yada yada. But the people who, I mean, Hamlin wrecked out as well. But the people that I wouldn't have to go in and like truly like have a lot of input on where they were at was like Reddick at Texas. Like everybody and their grandmother played Tyler Reddick. He projected well, he showed up well in the race, and he started up front and he finished up front. Tyler Reddick is starting fourth today at a significant discount of $8,200. And when you look at where like Reddick has been in these races, he's very much contending for a top 5 car. And when we look at a race like Dover, yet again, we have a lot of place differential plays that are looking really good, but there's 400 laps to be led. It's very likely that we see 2, if not 3, if not 4 people take the lead, especially when you look at the people who are up front who don't necessarily command a race for its entire length. I would much rather prioritize chasing lap leaders than the place differential plays. Like, for example, I think I have Larson projected for right around, like, this is the main discussion that I think is worth having with Larson for this example. So, like, I have Kyle Larson projected for 56 points today. I do not have him winning the race. And this is where like my day is going to be made or broken. Like, I don't think he leads today. I think he very much gets up there and runs like anywhere from like ninth to fifth all day. But getting to the lead, especially at the point where he would have that opportunity, would be, in stage 2, depending on when there's wrecks, stage 3. I don't think he gets that lead to be able to really push through the boundary of the projections at like 60 points or over that. And so, like, if Larson is scoring in the 50s, uh, he's most likely being priced out of the optimal lineup by people, by whether it's like just Reddick staying up front all day. Like, Reddick doesn't have to lead. There's a real chance that Reddick scores the exact same points, if not slightly more, than Kyle Larson. Denny Hamlin, cheaper than Larson, who's shown yet again, not just at Texas, but at races that we've been at recently. Like, he's very much going to be a top 3 driver today. Like, that's why, like, I'm not concerned about not using the practice data, because it's still lining up with where people should be based on these races. And so, going back to the place differential plays, going back to builds, I'm very much going to have ownership spread out for lap leaders, but I know for a fact I'm probably going to be well under the field on Kyle Larson. Not to be drastically different, not to like purposely like take a stance or have like a hot, wild, wacky approach to the race or anything, but just looking at the numbers, like, I just don't see like Larson really paying it off. And if you look at it in terms of like the outcomes that Larson realistically has, okay, like, we can realistically see Larson, and this is just clown math or mental math and stuff. Larson wins this race and like leads, gets up there in about like anywhere from like 7 to like 12% of these races. Okay, outside of that outcome, like 33% is very much a drastic underperformance or a DNF, and that can be categorized anywhere from like running like 17th to like 10th all day. Because if he's in that range, that lineup is dead. Like, his outcome is hindering that lineup. On the remaining like 50, 55% outcomes today, he's running from like 11 to 6. And if he's not getting those fast laps and laps led, which he can still get fast laps in those positions, don't get me wrong, but if he's not able to get to the lead, he's very much scoring like mid 50s today, if like high 50s, like 60s. And based on his price, like, I don't believe that he's going to work out to be optimal today. And that's basically what we're trying to chase. And so when you're looking at contest sims, when you're looking at projections, just raw projections there, and you see that Kyle Larson is projected to be the highest owned driver on the slate, like, I don't think that should be right. And I think there's going to be a lot of optimizers and people running sims and stuff that we're going to see his ownership be way higher. Like, when we look at where like Chandler Smith was yesterday for Xfinity, which these 2 lower series are very dependent on projections and optimizers and stuff. Like, there's just not a lot of content out there. There's very few sources. Like, the ownership that we saw on both Justin Allgaier and Ryan Truex yesterday made absolutely no logical sense uh, for all the ownership of everybody else who's right up front. I had several of the people that I trust like come to me yesterday and said, these people aren't watching these races. Like, there's no reason why, even if he doesn't work out, there's no reason why for Chandler Smith to be at 14% ownership. And so anyway, as the dominoes have fell, as I've like seen how this ownership goes, this is why today people are like, talk about the race and stuff. That's why at this very point, I figured this discussion on projection sims and all this was a very important thing to do, because I'm seeing that that's influencing things way more than it should be.
Well, let me ask you this. So let's get right into it. So for those of you that subscribe to TrueDFS, you get access to Brandon's projections. And not to give too much away as far as that goes, but apparently William Byron's winning, huh?
So 2 things with William Byron. So one, I mean, clearly I like him. I'm probably going to cap my personal ownership at like 35, 40%. But the one thing that I liked with these builds, because all my other projections I don't think are too drastic. And like I said, I told you where I have Larson, and people can see where I have all the other place differential plays. A lot of the builds, the thing that having William Byron placed at that projection is not only can I see, the incredible leverage I'm going to get on Byron and stuff, but do I have uh, salary left over in those lineups that would allow me to jump up from William Byron to get to Kyle Larson? Like, what am I drastically changing there? And for my stuff, and what I'm showing is that I would not have that extra $500 to go from Byron to Larson. Like, I would be actively passing up on other plays that I think are a priority. Um, and so for me, like, that was like a twofold thing that I could use William Byron for, and that's usually what I end up doing, especially if it's somebody like who should be competing for the laps led or for the win and stuff. But like when we look at Byron here and his consistency, I mean, even at Texas, never he did not perform at Texas. I mean, he ran third and second all day. He just never took the lead from whoever was there. But Byron is just as consistent as everybody else up here, and I'd much rather try and chase lap leaders than Kyle Larson.
Um, I heard. I'll just throw stuff again, stuff that I've heard. So if I've heard it, then everybody's heard it. Like Martin Truex apparently has good course history or something like that. What do we think of him? Because again, he's not really like the big place differential play, and he's also not starting really near the front. What do you make of him and guys like him? I guess.
So when we get to Truex, it's very much like he is the only people he is competing against. He's not competing against Larson. I don't believe that he's in the same um, category as Larson. I would argue that he's competing directly against somebody like a Denny Hamlin, like a William Byron, because Truex, just looking at this of where he should be at in this race, on top of the track history that people will follow for God knows why, in drastically different cars in different years. But like Truex should be like the sixth to fifth best car today. And at that point, um, then he's competing with like where Hamlin should be, because Hamlin's going to be right there. Byron's going to be right up there. Um, Larson, I mean, some people might argue that he's competing directly against Larson. I don't necessarily think they are, because Larson just has more place differential baked in. That Larson should beat Truex like head up in like every situation. Like Truex's role to work today is getting the lead. And so yet again, who is he competing against? He's competing against Blaney, Byron, Hamlin, and those drivers up there. I'm not very high. I'm probably not going to play Truex at all today, uh, because I would prioritize Reddick and Hamlin. And actually, like, this is like probably my main take. Like, clearly everybody knows I like Byron just because he's always under owned. But when we look at where Reddick is, yet again, I don't have Texas on here, but basically the second best car, if not the best car at Texas, the last 1.5 we were at. Second best car at Las Vegas. Very consistent last year as 2311 was getting better. And he's 8,200. Like, Tyler Reddick is a guy competing for the win today. He's not a pivot off of a lap leader. He's not a GPP play. People are going to argue, what about his pit road? Like, Reddick is going to compete for the win today, and he's completely mispriced. When we look at Hamlin, like, Hamlin and Reddick are actually my two favorite guys to compete for the win today. Same thing as Reddick did at Texas. Hamlin was like the second best car until he got spun out or until he wrecked. Fourth best car at Las Vegas, basically a top three car at the second half of the intermediates last year. He had the fourth best car here last year at Dover in this exact car. Like, Hamlin and Reddick are my two, probably the two guys I would see competing for the win realistically in this race. And yet again, moving back to where ownership is, moving back to where like ownership is not getting to these guys. Contest sims are not getting to these guys anywhere they should. And so, like, for me, when I see a drastic difference between where I'm at and compared to where the field is going to be, like, that is just where I just play wildly aggressive towards what I'm seeing versus the field. Yet again, like, this all comes back around to the 20-minute discussion we had at the start of this video of why I think people should be playing like Hamlin, Reddick, Byron, over like Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott.
This is a 1 mile track.
Yes.
So it's hard to pass on a 1 mile track, I'm just saying that, and I just find it interesting that you have all these place differential plays. I mean, isn't it? I just kind of visualized, like the Yonkers racetrack. It's like how are you going to get through like all these guys from the back? I heard again. I was listening to other places. There's like three. There's like could be like plays to go three wide and like other ways maybe on this track to do that. But I heard talk that there might be an extra caution or a competition caution or something like that. How is it? Is it extra difficult for these place differential plays to even get there today?
So I'm going to answer this question in two forms. One, in terms of the track itself, Dover is a very difficult track to pass, especially, I mean, every track you can pass on the restarts, but especially off of like 2, 3, 4 laps after a restart, when you have to individually pass people, like we're no longer side by side, it is difficult to pass. Last year, Larson was able to do that from starting from like 15th, 17th. We did have quite a lot of yellows, but by lap like 80, 79, Larson was in fifth and he got taken out involved in a wreck. So he was able to pass through the field. So that happened last year. What we saw at Texas, and I, yet again, like some people would argue that I use the incorrect tracks, but I have found success using these data points. That's why I bring that up. When you look at last week, 2 weeks before Talladega, the ownership that was on Kyle Busch at Texas. Okay, and he struggled getting through the field. He struggled passing people. Um, pit cycling goes through. He gets trapped a lap down. But if you look at the speed that he's running pretty much identical speed to the leaders in the race at Texas. And you were not able to get through the field. As this car has been out for, what is this, the third year of the next gen car, it's no longer a situation where people are, they don't know how this car reacts in certain situations. Like a lot of the teams, their setups are like as optimized as they're going to be for that particular team. And so like there's not as much separation between these cars and these teams and how much speed they have. And so when you looked at what happened at Texas, and people are going to argue, well, Kyle Busch came through, he worked. Well, yes, but in terms of where he was racing wise, he wasn't able to get through the field. He got up through the field through strategy, and then we had like 17 yellows at the end of the race. Um, I typically look at where they're running during the green flag conditions, and that's a big concern that I would actually have more so on Elliott than Larson. Like Elliott is very much a guy who can like underperform today because he just takes all day to get up and he finishes like 11th, 10th, 9th. And he just doesn't work out. Like I think that is very much a realistic outcome, and that's the exact same thing that I thought last week or 2 weeks ago at Texas with Kyle Busch, and I played absolutely no Kyle Busch at all, and I still cashed. And he was like 50, 55% owned. Like he was the lock of the slate. He was the core on every site. He was showing up in every optimizer and contest sim, and I just said I don't see that build. I don't think it's worth going there. And so like yet again, looking back at how people have been playing, how the field is playing, what things are showing, like I think you should be very much underweight to Elliott and Larson today.
Would you do I mean, I know that some people that either use Sabersim or don't use Sabersim like to do groups and things like that. Is there any groups that you'd be interested in highlighting or dissuading from or anything like that?
I would probably not a group, but I guess of a rule of
Yeah, sorry.
okay. So I would probably want, and this is where yet again, like this is going to be way drastic compared to what the field would do, but I probably want either 2 or 3 of Kyle Busch, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, Tyler Reddick, Denny Hamlin. I mean, that's basically your 5 of the top 6 starters. I want 2 or 3 of those guys because they have shown over the courses of these races that these individual drivers will more than likely hold a top 5 running position all day, and they are the most likely candidates to flip-flop each other for the lead on pit road during a long green flag run. That's what I'm trying to capitalize versus the place differential play of the people in the back.
And has there been is there anything to speak of as far as like the makes of the cars or the teams or anything like that? Is any again? I haven't been with you on one of these things in a while. Has there been any teams or models or drivers or whatever that have been exceeding expectations recently that we should think about, or not so much?
I would start leaning towards more the Toyota camp, being the more uh, like taking over from Larson and Byron during this next month. I'm very interested to see specifically how Reddick, Hamlin, Truex race and are in terms of speed with Byron, Larson, and I just went blank on the other Chevy I would bring up.
It's
But
a
I'm I'm very curious on how that goes because I think Joe Gibbs is very much getting close to eclipsing Hendrick on the 1.5s and hurting Larson's performances for this next month or so.
Yeah, the only way I think of it is we're thinking of getting like different edges and things like that. And remember, what projections are doing is they are basing stuff on past past performances to some degree. And I was wondering what if there was any drivers or whatever that you felt like kind of had that momentum, that we could get a little early on. And I think you just kind of hit on one. That what you think could happen in the next couple of weeks. I think it's kind of healthy to speculate on that a little bit.
Yeah, at least that's mainly what I try and approach, especially during the month of May every year. Like this is crucial for me to try and be ahead. So yet again, going back to where I think ownership will come through, I want to be on Hamlin, Reddick, even Blaney and like Kyle Busch. Like I know Kyle Busch started in the pole last year. He spent on pit lane, and Kyle Busch hasn't necessarily been the fastest guy when we look at where I have him ranked here. But as I said, he practically had the third best car at Las Vegas until a pit lane issue, and then he ended up being like the eighth best car. At Texas, he started in the back, like that's on him, but he was running very much identical speed to the leaders. The fact that he's starting first today at $9,000, I think there's a realistic chance, like Larson or not Larson, that Kyle Busch can, lead 40, 50, 60, 70 laps in this race. I don't think he's going to win it. I don't think he'll maintain holding first. But if he doesn't run into issues on pit road, Kyle Busch should finish in the top 8 today. Um, and so, like, I think that ownership is justified at probably like projected from anywhere from like 28 to 30. But he's 9,000. Ryan Blaney's 9.6. Reddick is 8.2. I think Bubba Wallace is a phenomenal play in the 7K range. And so, like, paying up for Larson, paying up for, possibly two place differential plays with Larson and or Elliott, um, I just don't like the outcomes of that building style today.
This is actually a question I was kind of getting to earlier, or you kind of touched on it that came up in the chat. Someone asked, when you make your projections, do you kind of, I don't want to say have biases, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but do you make your projections based on just so that you make sure you'll get, you know, some of a guy you really want to play, or do you just project what you think they're gonna do, and then you get what you get, and you don't get upset?
So going back to the fact that I hand build every single lineup, um, my projections are in place for that specific instance of when I'm hand building and when I'm able to compare specifically like between like different price not price ranges, but compare like a driver head to head between other people. Like it's usually mainly for how to fill out my lineups. Like for example, I mean, like everybody pretty much knows, even if they don't have us, they know that I have Byron as my highest projected guy today. Just so I can see what builds I need to have with Byron in those situations. So like for today, I would not be playing like 85, 70, 60% Byron. I'm going to play like 35, 40%. And then at that point, I'm going to cut it off. His projection is so high that he does not have an impact if I just remove him from the pool. Like I can still see how everybody else should go through. That's the difference between me and like a mean projection, whereas I have one number that I work off of. And so like that one number is um, what I believe that individual driver is going to do. So removing drivers, or once I build lines with the people that I want, removing those drivers and not changing projections for other people has helped me be able to build better lineups, at least for me personally. Like that's why I do projections the way I have. I've just found success doing it that way.
Yeah, and again, not to get too much into the lineup construction piece, but what people will ask me from time to time, like if you really like a guy, whatever that means. Like if you really like a guy, like kind of like regardless of what he's coming up with in projections, like how do you deal with that? Like let's just and I think it's healthy in a way, to some degree. If you really have a take on what's going to happen that's not being factored into, how do you handle that? And there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could just manually just go in and say I'm locking the guy in. You could manually go in and say I want to have at least 50% of them. Or if you wanted to, you could just up the projection to some amount. Um, what I like to do, if it helps anybody, is I'll run the builds without doing anything different. And then if I still feel as though I need to get more of them, then I maybe I'll just manually put more in, because I've tried to mess around with just upping the projection a little bit, but it's not exactly the best way to do it either. So, because it affects everything else. So what I'll do is, again, if I happen to like a guy, I'll run the builds as normal, and then I will just manually change it later. This way, if I have like 1,000 lineups I'm choosing from, I at least know that that it's going to be at least one of the top 1,000 lineups I'm getting to, as opposed to if I just said at the beginning I'm going to put in like X% of a guy. I might end up just I might end up getting lineups that are like rated like 12,000. So that's the way I handle that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of do it in the same way. So like the way that I do use SaberSim for NASCAR is just so I can visually see all my lineups.
Yeah.
And then I just sort by projected own. So like, oh, I've found the Byron lines that I want. I'll just take him out, and then I'll just be able to see what the highest projected ones are once I remove him and stuff like that.
Right.
The one thing we haven't talked about today is the value range. And I personally don't really have a true take on that because I'm so drastically different up top from the field that I'm just getting to whoever I end up getting to at the bottom to make that work. At the moment, that is, let me go ahead and look at who I'm getting to in the value range. Let's see. I'm most likely getting to Todd Gilliland at the moment, even with the projection that I have for him. If I'm paying up from that range, it's going to Priest and Nemechek from what I can see. But I really don't want to punt in a race like this to somebody like Kazgrala, Haley, just because going back on top of everything else, like this is a very difficult track to pass at. These drivers will be a lap down at some point. Like there's a good chance this race finishes with 11 cars on the lead lap. And I don't really want to have as many people in my lineup a lap down if possible. Corey Heim at 58 is also getting to my lineups a pure speculative play. There's not a single data point you can use for Corey Heim on his projection today, outside of the fact that, well, he's 5,800. He should score better than the guys priced lower than him, and that's really it. But I don't really have any takes on these drivers in the back of the field.
Yeah, my highest owned cheapo, by the way, and I think this because he's such low projected ownership, is a guy that I just kind of like playing, which is cool. So I'm getting like a decent amount of Corey LaJoie. Definitely prefer him like in the 38 hole than the 25, which is why he's going to be 8% owned, maybe. So that's where I'm getting when I'm running my sims, and that's one of the benefits of doing that. I'm getting like him, and then I'm getting like other guys I don't want to play. Like, oh, can you imagine actually playing AJ Allmendinger from the 10 hole? You know what I mean?
God. Yeah.
Right. So, those are the 5,900. So those are the types of idiots that I'll end up with, at really, really low ownership, to go with the chalkier, Chase Elliott, Chastain, Byron builds, or whatever. But but maybe listen, maybe Byron's not as chalky as he could be. Listen, he's 11,000. It's not like he's cheap. I have him at 27% ownership, or 28. Who knows? But Byron usually, like you said, and this is work somebody can do. He does tend to be lower owned than I should be, is kind of an egotistical way of saying it. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
he tends to be lower owned than a lot of sharp people think he should be. How about that?
I think that's a good description
Yeah.
or a good answer. I talked about this in a video I made 2 weeks ago, where I did have, or at least I talked about it very much, what we've seen from previous years during the month of May. And we've seen that the people who have had the best cars or have been very much competing for wins have been lower owned, specifically in the month of May, whether it was Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr. in years past. For whatever reason, like the people who have competed for wins, whether they wreck or not, have been lower owned in each individual season when you look back at like a microscope of how the field has been playing. Um, so that's another thing to note, or at least I think is noteworthy when we start entering this month.
I'll tell you something else. I mean, I don't know much, but I know this. People love to play Kyle Larson. They love it, and you know what else they love doing? Like every time that he kind of blows up or does something stupid, they love to complain about it, you know, and they love to. I can't. He did it again or whatever, and then they just keep right back, putting him at 60% ownership the next week. So you can play him, but you're not allowed to complain. You know what I mean? Like that's you know what I mean. That's the deal. I mean, you're allowed to, go ahead, complain, and then you're going to play him again next week. But but they love it. They love playing Kyle Larson. They just love doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a take in DFS in general. I don't know. I've very much learned to just. I mean, I get tilted and stuff, but I can't complain. I've done dumber things than play some of these guys.
Yeah.
Somebody brought up Alex Bowman very fast. So like, I just can't personally. I cannot get to Bowman today just because I would prioritize everybody I've already talked about. But Bowman should very much run from anywhere from like 13th to 8th all day. If he can get lead on pit lane or gain position on pit lane, that'd be amazing. But I think that's the avenue you're looking for from Bowman. We'll probably wrap it up in like the next like 5-10ish minutes, depending on if there's a lot of questions and stuff. But I mean, we've basically talked about everything I've been wanting to discuss in this race, and I really do appreciate you for us just going back on Sims, whether some people don't like it or not. I'd love like that type of discussion for DFS. I think that's where DFS is in terms of game theory and approach. I just think that's where it is, and it's certainly going to. And I think that's why these discussions are so important.
You know
And
what
I
the
don't hear.
fact is, I haven't been here for a while, so that's
Yeah.
there you go.
Let's see. And then I will say that for Dover specifically, because the speed limit is 35 on this track.
What does that wait? What does that mean? What does that mean?
So typically like pit road speed at other
Pit road.
tracks,
Okay.
yeah, like pit road speed, like what the speeding penalty will be at. Typically the speed limit is like 45, 50, 40, depending on what track it is. This is one of the slowest pit speeds on the NASCAR circuit, and so the advantage that a fast pit crew has at a track like this is a bit negated because everybody's going so slow. The main point on pit lane here that's important is not being crowded by a car in front of you or behind. So pit stall selection is much more important here than an individual pit crew speed. And so if people want to make arguments for, I'm personally not playing them, but if you want to make arguments for like Noah Gragson, Chase Briscoe, Michael McDowell, hell, even Austin Cindric maintaining a running position up front, like they have advantages on pit lane that could lead them to doing that. Now, if they lose it on the track, that's on them. But they do have slight advantages on pit lane than other cars in this race.
I guess this is a dumb question. Is any drivers that we know of now like going to have to start from the rear or?
I don't believe so. Outside of, I mean, like Zane Bell, but like nobody like actually important or from up front known at the moment. Let me see. I mean, the race is 3 hours away. That might change, but I don't foresee that happening. Past that, what is your okay? So we haven't talked about Suarez at all, and typically, if I don't talk about somebody, I usually don't have an
You
opinion on
can,
their
you can
play.
rely on me to usually talk about him because he's another guy I like playing.
Yeah. So what are you doing with Suarez? Like,
I'm not
if
getting
I
there. I'm not getting there this time. I don't think. Let me just see. I would have noticed. I would have noticed if I got to a bunch of
yeah,
Yeah, I like playing him. Where is he starting this week?
he's starting 31st.
Oh man.
I right. So right now
Oh,
I've done. I think I've done like 14 out of my 20 lines, and I have Suarez in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have him in 5, and I have no opinion on him at all. I've just landed on him in those individual lineups. That's why I was curious on where you're at.
I'm only getting like 10%.
Okay.
He. If I play him, then I'm gonna have to play less AJ Allmendinger. So
Oh yeah, like that could be the worst thing in the world.
what can you do? Like
Yeah.
you got to have your AJ Allmendinger for the 10 hole. I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise you're not living. What else did other guys I was going to bring up? LaJoy I like to play. We talked about him. Did Hocevar do well last week, as I recall, or no?
So let me look.
Or did he win? No. Oh, who won yesterday? Did Truex win yesterday?
Ryan did.
Okay.
Trix's
Are
brother.
people going to overplay that narrative and play more Martin
I
Truex this week than they're supposed to? Or
I have no idea.
okay.
That's I mean I have my wild narratives too, but I don't know if I would
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
that. So Hocevar is interesting. So I don't know what to do with Hocevar personally because my projections in terms of my builds wanted me to play just a ton of Hocevar. It
Oh,
was like
really?
this is the guy you have to lock in at the
Okay.
6K range and you can get to everybody you want up top. And what do I have him projected for? Let me see. Like I have Hocevar for like 33 points, and that's him finishing like 15th today. He's been the best um, Spire car, but that just seems. I just feel like that can go wrong in a lot of ways. I do have him in a couple lines just based on like my principle is if my stuff's telling me to play somebody, I just play him. But I I don't really like Hocevar as a play, despite the fact that I have him.
Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna do the what I call the John. This is the John DeMott theory. So John
All right.
DeMott was a guy I used to go to the racetrack with, like back in the days, and he would just bet like 100 different things every race, and he would always say at the end, he says, "Okay, this is what you got to do. When there's 2 minutes to post, you look at your tickets, and then you say to yourself, okay, if X wins or if X comes in, I'm gonna be really pissed off, and then you go bet that too." Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so
yeah.
so who is the low owned or the guy that you would want to speculate on that you're not playing that you should play now, knowing you've now been granted by the evil genie one more lineup and one more slot? Who are you not going to play that you're going to kick yourself when he wins?
Well, I got two for
Okay,
this,
go
and
for it.
luckily I've covered both. This is how I just build. Like I,
Go for
I,
it.
I I usually cover this anyway, but one is
Okay.
Hocevar, and the other
Okay.
one is Ryan Blaney.
There it is. Okay. Go
Ryan
ahead.
Blaney, I'm gonna have him probably 20% of my lines. I think they're dead on arrival. I don't
Great.
think they have a chance, but I'm gonna have Ryan Blaney today because I
Well,
feel that
perfect.
exact way on
Perfect.
him.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to have the one suicide lineup, the avoid
Yeah,
suicide if it comes in lineup. So you have to
yeah.
get that one also.
And then, which is so funny because some of my better days in DFS NASCAR have been on those lineups because I build very few with like somebody. They go out and win the race, but I've just built those individual lineups as optimal as possible. So that's why I've embraced having lineups like that. I think I think past that we've about covered everything that
Yep.
the
Yep.
chat has wanted to. I mean, I am glad that people did enjoy this. As we are at this point. I think that's about it. Do you have any last minute things that you want to say, or
Nah, I'm good. We're good to, I
who's
won't
your
be around.
driver? That
I won't be around to be sweating the end of it. I'm gonna be out for something. But what time is the race actually?
it starts in 3 hours, whatever that is.
So 2 o'clock. Oh, actually, we'll be around to sweat. When do you think it ends?
2.5 hours later, probably. This should be a
Oh,
faster race.
oh, maybe I will be around for that. So hopefully, somebody here gets. I shouldn't say a sweat because it's hard to actually have a sweat.
Yeah.
But hopefully someone takes it down.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us, and I'll see you guys in preview videos later in the week. And best of luck, guys. I'll see you guys later.
All right. See you later.